I want you to set aside for a moment everything you think you know about life and death, because every definition you've been taught is based on the assumption that reality is fixed. Time flows linearly, and you are merely a passive spectator watching the development of a pre-written story within this grand order. But what if this entire assumption is wrong? What if death is not an end, but merely a disruption, a loading error, a simulation malfunction in the layer of reality you inhabit? If reality is truly a simulation, a possibility debated not only by science fiction writers, but also by the most serious physicists and philosophers of our time, then death means not the erasure of existence, but the rebooting of the system. Forget everything you've been taught. Reality is not fixed. Time is not certain. Death is not the end. And you are not a helpless passenger on an uncontrolled journey. Because perhaps the moment of death is the moment the simulation is reloaded. Stop for a moment and imagine this. Your heart stops beating, your breath catches, darkness falls, and then something returns. You open your eyes, but the world is as wrong as it is familiar. The light is more intense than ever, the sounds muffled, the silence unpeaceful, almost artificial, as if the universe is undercharged, as if something is still being calculated in the background. Neither heaven nor hell, more like a programmed but flawed environment. And here begins the real question. What if death isn't real? What if it's just a simulation error? This thought might seem exaggerated at first glance, but it actually aligns perfectly with some of the most unsettling realities of modern science. As Elon Musk has repeatedly stated, the probability that the reality we live in is the fundamental reality is statistically extremely low. Nick Bostrom's simulation argument takes this even further. If any civilization were technologically advanced enough, it would reach a level where it could simulate conscious beings. And if that were possible, the number of simulated universes would exponentially exceed the number of real universes. The question then becomes, how certain are you that you truly live in a single, unique universe? If this is a simulation, death is not annihilation. Death is a reboot, a transfer, a memory reset, or a transition of the code to another state. Perhaps that's why you experience déjà vu. Perhaps that's why some moments feel like they've happened before. The Mandela effect, contradictory memories, near-death experiences that defy logic, and the completely unintuitive results of quantum physics. They all lead to the same conclusion. Because the quantum world clearly shows us this, reality is not complete until it is observed. The delayed choice. Quantum eraser experiment is one of the most striking pieces of evidence for this. In this experiment, a single particle is sent to a detector along two possible paths. But what is truly astonishing is that how the particle behaves depends on a decision made after the journey is complete. If the information about which path the particle took is preserved, the particle behaves like matter. If this information is erased, it causes wave interference, behaving as if it traveled both paths simultaneously. What's even more disturbing is this. The decision to erase or preserve the information is made after the particle has reached its destination. In other words, the future determines the past. The outcome changes after the event. This shouldn't be possible in the universe of classical physics. Yet it makes perfect sense in a data-driven, computed, and reconstructed universe. This is called the observer effect, and it shakes the foundations of everything you thought you knew about matter, time, and space. If matter doesn't behave like matter until someone observes it, then what are we really in? Reality is not static. Reality is reactive. Just like in a video game, the universe doesn't load everything at once. It only clarifies the areas you focus your attention on. The details behind you aren't computed. They don't exist until you turn around. You only hear a sound when you focus on it. It's no coincidence that you suddenly feel watched when you enter a room. Because attention triggers the system. The universe waits. It waits for your signal. It waits for your observation, your choice, your awareness. And if reality truly works this way, death is not a closure, but a transition, a restructuring, even a mistake. And the real question is no longer what happens after death. The real question is, in this simulation, what is it that causes the system to start giving you different answers? Chapter 2. Have you ever frantically searched for something? Your keys, your phone, your glasses? You look again and again, and then, just as you're about to give up, they appear as if an invisible curtain has lifted. This is often explained as simple inattention, but the experience itself is different. The object was there, but not reachable, until your mental state changes. This isn't a physical disappearance. It's a perceptual lock-in. In cognitive science, this is called the attention filter. From a quantum perspective, it's the moment of access to information. In simulation terms, the system was waiting for the correct input. Sometimes a solution comes, the answer to a difficult question, the solution to a complex problem. You think about it for a long time. It doesn't work. Then you give up. Just as you're doing something else, it comes to you as if downloaded from somewhere. This is no coincidence. Brain imaging studies show that the moment of solution often comes not after conscious effort, but when that effort stops. Because when the conscious mind withdraws, a deeper processing layer kicks in. If reality were static, the answer either exists or doesn't. But here, the answer is loaded in the correct state of consciousness. This brings us to a more unsettling point about how the universe works. Physicist John Archibald Wheeler, who worked with Einstein, came up with the idea of the participating universe. According to him, the universe is not complete until it is observed. Reality emerges with consciousness. This isn't a mystical claim. It's a necessary consequence of quantum physics. The double-slit experiment, the delayed choice quantum eraser, and the observer effect show us that how matter manifests depends on how it is observed. In other words, the universe is not a passive stage. It is interactive. If reality only becomes real when observed, then what you live in cannot be a fixed, pre-written world. Rather, it is a system that processes on demand. Like in video games, the details behind the player aren't loaded. That's a waste of resources. But when the player turns, the world is there. Neuroscience shows that the brain works similarly. Things you don't see aren't processed in full detail. If the universe itself behaves differently, the question is, are we living in a universe or in an interface? Here we come to the matter of the body. If we're in a simulation, the body isn't you. The brain isn't you. These are the hardware, the interface, the controller, the console, the avatar. The real question is, where is the player? Scientists like Roger Penrose and Sir John Eccles have argued that consciousness cannot be solely a product of the brain, because consciousness involves quantum uncertainty, intuitive leaps, and timeless decisions. But the brain is biologically a slow and deterministic structure. Therefore, consciousness may not be something the brain produces, but rather an area to which the brain connects. If consciousness isn't local, that is, if it's not limited by space and time, then what does death mean? The hardware shuts down, the screen goes black, but the connection doesn't break. At this point, a disturbing thought arises. What if, from your perspective, death never happens? What if it's just a transition within the system? There are experiences that make you think this way. Narrow escapes. Flights canceled at the last minute. Moments when you think, this time I was definitely going to die. And then that strange silence, as if the world has stopped for a moment. Time seems to flow, but something is missing. Many people experience these moments, but can't name them. Psychology dismisses it as sharp awareness. But what if it's a moment of synchronization? As Hugh Everett points out, according to the multiverse interpretation, every possibility occurs. Every decision branches out the universe. Small decisions create small segments. But what about big decisions? What about fatal decisions? In one universe, you're hit by a car and die. In another, you survive at the last moment. The question is, in which universe does your consciousness continue? Logically, in the version that sustains the experience. This idea is called quantum immortality. From the outside, you are immortal. But from a subjective point of view, consciousness is not interrupted. Because consciousness only follows the branches where the experience continues. This isn't a fantasy. This is a necessary consequence of the multiverse interpretation. And if it's true, the meaning of your being here right now is this. You had versions of yourself that didn't survive, but you didn't experience them. That's why you experience déjà vu. That's why sometimes a moment feels wrong. You walk into a room and feel an inexplicable heaviness. It's like something was supposed to happen, but didn't. Or it did, but it's not here. It doesn't necessarily have to be a nervous breakdown. From this perspective, death isn't an end. It's a loading screen, a transitional moment. The simulation continues on another branch where you can sustain the experience. And you, reading this right now, are in the unbroken version of this chain. You are a survivor. You are the continuing signal. This thought isn't meant to comfort you, but to awaken you. Because if reality is reactive, if the system responds to conscious input, then you are not a passive passenger. The story hasn't been written yet. The code is running and waiting for your signal. The question isn't, is this true? The real question is, if it is true, how will you live? Chapter 3. The Bardo narratives reveal a critical point here. Death is not a descent into darkness, but an intermediate stage where perception is temporarily dissolved and restructured. In Tibetan tradition, the Bardo is described as a stage where consciousness separates from its old form, but is not yet fully locked into the new structure. Therefore, awareness, not fear, is necessary. The text specifically emphasizes that whatever consciousness clings to, whatever thought and intention it echoes, the next upload occurs at that frequency. This is more akin to a law of physics than a moral judgment, just as a signal finds a receiver at the frequency it aligns with. The common thread in these ancient texts is this: consciousness does not reset when the body dies. It changes direction. In modern terminology, the process is not a hard shutdown, but a controlled or uncontrolled instantaneous transfer. What makes this interesting is that these narratives emerged thousands of years ago, before computers, quantum physics, and the concept of the multiverse. However, the structure described is surprisingly familiar: transitional screens, intermediate states, fixation of awareness, the decisive role of intention. A similar understanding is found in the Orphic and Platonic traditions of ancient Greece. Plato, in describing the soul's passage from body to body, defines it not as a system of punishment or reward, but as a cycle of learning and remembering. The soul comes from the world of forms, binds to matter, and then dissolves again. The key word here is remembering, because knowledge is not learned later, it is remembered. This means that consciousness has a continuity independent of time and a single body. Looking at Eastern traditions, the picture becomes even clearer. The Hindu Upanishads and Vedanta teachings identify consciousness with Brahman, the universal field. What you call the individual self is a temporary fluctuation of this field. The wave subsides, but the ocean remains. In this perspective, death is a change in the shape of the wave. The water does not disappear. This metaphor perfectly aligns with the law of conservation of energy in modern physics. Energy does not disappear, it only changes form. If consciousness is a form of energy or information, then the same law should apply to it. Now let's reconsider this from a contemporary scientific perspective. According to information theory, information cannot be destroyed, only dispersed or re-encoded. Even the black hole paradox remains unresolved for this reason. The universe does not allow for the complete erasure of information. If consciousness is a highly organized information structure, then the complete disappearance of this information upon death is physically inconsistent. More likely, the structure is dissolved and reintegrated into another context. At this point, near-death experiences cease to be random anecdotes. The common thread in the experiences of people whose hearts have clinically stopped and whose brain activity has dropped to immeasurable levels is striking. Time stopping, observation from outside the body, intense clarity, a sense of evaluation rather than judgment, and a decision to return. Neurological explanations cannot fully encompass all of this, because the experiences are not merely scattered like hallucinations, but highly structured. It is as if consciousness has temporarily been connected to another protocol. Here, the simulation analogy regains meaning. If this reality is layered, death can be an exit from one layer and an entry into another. What the ancients called gates, thresholds, and guardians can be read in modern terms as transition filters or adaptation stages. Rituals, prayers, and intention work are stabilizers that prevent the dispersion of consciousness during this transition. So the issue is not believing, but preparing. This perspective does not make life meaningless. On the contrary, it makes it more responsible. Because if consciousness continues, what you carry is not just memories, but your frequency, your habits, your fears, your level of awareness. These are not data erased upon death. The system carries what you are. That is why ancient teachings focus more on awareness than morality. They don't say, be good. They say, be awake. At the intersection of all these narratives, a single idea emerges. Death is not an absolute end as human consciousness imagines it. Rather, it is a realignment of perception from one context to another. Modern physics, quantum theory, and information science explain this in different ways. In ancient times, it was transmitted through myths, symbols, and rituals. However, the structure being shown remains the same. And at this point, the unsettling but transformative truth emerges. If death is a transition, then life is a preparation. If consciousness is a leap, then your present state shapes not only this moment, but also what follows. Simulatio. Chapter 4. The essence of this chapter is this: reality is not a static scene. It is a sensitive and layered system that reacts according to your level of consciousness. And death is not the end of this system, but a moment of transition to a higher context of perception. However, this transition is not automatic. It depends on whether you are conscious or not. Therefore, ancient traditions focus not on death itself, but on remaining conscious in the face of death. Consciousness, in its ordinary state, is fragmented, divided by thoughts, guided by emotions, and constrained by fears. What you call self in daily life is actually a constantly changing mental noise. The ancients were aware of this. Therefore, monks, shamans, and initiates dedicated years to calming the mind, focusing attention on a single point, and not losing awareness even at the moment of death. Because for them, death was the moment when consciousness was tested. An uncontrolled transition meant that consciousness would be locked back into the same cycle. At this point, the analogy of simulation ceases to be a metaphor, because what is described perfectly matches the working principle of a modern simulation engine. The system generates content according to the player's awareness. If consciousness is clouded, the experience is chaotic. If consciousness is clear, the transition is fluid. This is why ancient texts speak of dreamlike, formless, fluid realms after death. These are neither punishment nor reward. They are intermediate layers where consciousness has not yet been fixed. The Gnostics expressed this structure in harsher terms than others. They said this world was wrong, not only symbolically, but also structurally. They spoke of a subsystem that imitated the true God, but was separate from him. This principle, which they called the demiurge, was an architect that bound consciousness to matter, fear, and forgetfulness. But the important point is this. According to the Gnostics, the problem was not the body. The problem was forgetfulness. Man had forgotten that he was a player. Therefore, according to the Gnostic view, death was not a defeat, but a possibility of escape. However, not every death is an escape. If consciousness is asleep, the system returns you to the same game. If awareness is present, escape is possible. The Hermetic saying, "as above, so below," perfectly summarizes this. This doesn't mean heaven resembles earth. It means your inner order directly shapes your external experience. You experience this in modern life as well. When you undergo an inner transformation, you realize that the external world changes simultaneously. Toxic people leave your life. Your health improves. Old habits disappear. As your self-worth increases, opportunities, respect, and resources emerge. This is not a coincidence. This is the system's response to your frequency. As the signal changes, so does the code. Plato's allegory of the cave is the simplest example of this structure. People are chained to the wall from birth, their faces turned towards it. Because they have no other point of reference, they confuse the shadows they see with reality. They have never seen fire, an object, or a light source. When one of them breaks free from their chains and turns around, their first experience is painful. Their eyes are dazzled. Their minds resist because reality is alien to them. But when they step outside and see the sun, they realize that the shadows were only reflections. The real tragedy is this: when you go back and tell this story, others will not believe you, because shadows are their entire reality. Therefore, according to Plato, those who see the truth are left alone, because the system rewards continuity, not awakening. Now we come to the question, what if death is that moment? What if it is the moment your body collapses, the moment you turn your head and take your first step out of the cave? What if time, fear, identity, body are all shadows on the wall? And what if death is only the first moment you can look at the light source? From this perspective, death is not darkness. Darkness is within the illusion. Death is the moment when perception expands, the burden is lifted, and the system can no longer limit you. But this is not an automatic liberation. It is only a potential transition. What you see, what you experience, depends on the clarity of your consciousness. Here, 4 common points of ancient teachings come together. The Egyptians mapped death not as an end, but as a layered process of ascension. Tibetan tradition defined the space between lives as a fluid and reactive space. The Gnostics said this world is a layer of forgetting. Plato, on the other hand, said life is made up of shadows, and reality begins when you move away from them. They all say the same thing in different languages. Reality is more flexible than you think. Death is more permeable than you think. And consciousness is far more central. Chapter 5. This chapter marks a turning point in the narrative. Because we are no longer talking about ancient texts, philosophical inferences, or metaphors, we are talking about modern medicine, neuroscience, and clinically documented cases. In other words, it's no longer a matter of believing or not believing, but of inexplicable data. For centuries, mystics, monks, and ancient teachings pointed to the same conclusion. Consciousness is not inherent to the body, and death is not an annihilation, but a transition. For a long time, these narratives were considered myths. Ironically, however, today physicists and neuroscientists are approaching the same conclusion by taking a completely different path. The idea that reality can be simulated, that consciousness is a fundamental constant, and that the body serves only as an interface is no longer marginal. It is at the center of serious academic debate. And now we come to the question: if consciousness is not truly produced by the brain, what happens when the brain shuts down completely? This is precisely where near-death experiences come into play. Because these experiences are not theoretical, it's being reported by people considered clinically dead. No pulse, no breath, no oxygen. The EEG shows a flat line. In other words, a state where, according to modern medicine, the formation of consciousness is impossible. And yet, these people return and recount information they couldn't possibly possess. Here, we must set aside philosophy, because the issue isn't what we want to believe, but where we place which data. Dr. Eben Alexander, a Harvard-trained neurosurgeon, is one of the most striking examples. For many years, he was a staunch materialist. He believed that everything related to consciousness was a product of the brain, until he fell into a coma due to a rare infection that completely disabled his neocortex. For days, there was no brain activity. He couldn't dream or hallucinate. And at that very moment, he reported experiencing a kind of consciousness he had never experienced before. Dense, coherent, and structured. Placeless but orderly spaces. Conscious beings. A deep sense of being at home. The sentence she uttered when she woke up was very clear. While my brain was shut down, my consciousness was clearer than ever. This is not an isolated incident. Anita Moorjani, a terminally ill cancer patient, fell into a coma. Her organs were failing. Doctors said she would die within hours. She described how her consciousness left her body, how she saw her hospital room from above, and how she witnessed events miles away. The accuracy of these details was later confirmed, and what followed was impossible, according to medical literature. Her consciousness returned, and her body began to heal rapidly. This wasn't a recovery. It was more like a reboot. It was as if the code was rewritten when the system was reactivated. Figures like Dr. Raymond Moody and Dr. Pim van Lommel, who were academics and physicians, not mystics, documented thousands of cases. Different countries, different cultures, different belief systems, but the narratives were almost identical. People recounted verbatim what was said during surgery, described instruments they had never seen before. Some even described events that took place outside the hospital. The key question here is, where does this information come from when the brain shuts down? The materialist model doesn't have a language to answer this, because in this model, consciousness is a byproduct of the brain. When the brain stops, consciousness should also stop. However, the data doesn't support this. On the contrary, consciousness seems to continue working at another level, and the brain only acts as a terminal connected to this system. Even more interesting, many near-death experiences describe a life assessment experience. But this isn't a collage of memories. It's more like an interactive reenactment. They experience not only what they themselves experienced, but also what others felt. They directly feel the impact of their decisions on others. It's as if the system has recorded all the data and uploads it directly to the conscious level. Now stop and think, why does such a consistent, comprehensive, and interactive examination occur when the brain is switched off? Is this possible if reality isn't being recorded at every moment? The Lancet, one of the most respected medical journals, openly admits they cannot explain the mechanism of these experiences. They cannot deny it because the data is there. They also cannot explain it because the current model is inadequate. And all these cases have one common conclusion. Consciousness is not trapped in the brain. It's not local. It transcends the body. If reality were a simulation, this is exactly what we would expect. The avatar shuts down. The interface darkens, but the player, that is, consciousness, remains in the system. Some access this layer and return. Some don't return, but none disappear. At this point, death no longer seems like an end. It seems more like a session change, a transition screen, perhaps a system error. And modern science, unintentionally, has come closer to what ancient civilizations said thousands of years ago. The question is no longer, is this true? The real question is, if this is true, what exactly is the life we are living? Chapter 6. When the physical form dies, existence doesn't end, it only changes. Because the physical body is not the source of consciousness, but its temporary carrier. In modern physics, no information is lost, it only transforms. Energy is conserved, information is preserved, and systems simply change state. In this context, death is not annihilation, but a phase transition. Some consciousnesses return from this transition, some are restarted, and some continue unknowingly in another reality. Because consciousness only perceives the timeline being followed. Paths not taken are not perceived. This means you may have died in other timelines before, but you wouldn't notice, because consciousness only experiences the active version each time. In quantum physics, this is explained by the collapse of the wave function. Possibilities exist, but only one is experienced. The others are not erased. They are simply not observed. Consciousness works the same way. You only remember the timeline you are currently in, while the paths you left behind remain as faint traces in memory. One of the strongest proofs of survival is that you are transitioning between realities. The feeling of déjà vu, memory overlaps that aren't fully explained scientifically, temporary feelings of familiarity. These are too consistent to be dismissed as ordinary brain errors. Feeling like you've lived a scene before, knowing a sentence before hearing it, sensing the outcome of an event. These are small leaks of the idea that time isn't linear. The brain can't explain it because it isn't the brain. This is where the Mandela effect comes in. This effect isn't a misremembering, but a fragment of memory remaining from a different version of reality. Millions of people who remember Nelson Mandela dying in prison in the 1980s share the same scenes, the same news, the same emotional narratives. But in this reality, he didn't die. He became president and lived until 2013. The fact that such a large group produces the same misremembering cannot be explained by classical memory theories, because individual error is possible. But that doesn't mean that false memories are produced collectively and consistently. This situation points to a shift in timelines. If we think in terms of software logic, when a system is updated, the old version isn't completely erased. Traces remain, caches overlap, data remnants emerge. Reality works similarly. When consciousness transitions from one version to another, it carries with it some fragments of data from the previous reality. The Mandela effect is the awareness of these data remnants. Therefore, famous deaths are the most striking examples, because death leaves a powerful collective trace. There are thousands of people who remember that figures like Betty White, Billy Graham, and Muhammad Ali died years before their official deaths. They recount the dates, the headlines, the ceremonies. But in this reality, these events never happened. The contradiction here is not the inconsistency of individual memory, but the inconsistency of reality itself. Quantum theories of mind suggest that consciousness is not tied to a single version of the universe. Consciousness interacts with probabilities at the quantum level and is not static. Some physicists argue that consciousness can process multiple states simultaneously, but awareness only follows one. This makes it possible for a memory from a reality that no longer exists to seep into active reality. These seeps are not frightening, but informative, because it shows that reality is not static. It is fluid, it is changeable, it is updatable, and you are a consciousness that has survived these updates. The Mandela effect is not a mistake. It is a signal. It is a trace of displacement. It is the remnant of having been in another version before. In this context, death is the greatest Mandela effect, because death is the harshest transition. From the outside, it seems like an end. People mourn. The story seems closed. But from the perspective of conscious experience, death is not experienced. What is experienced is a sudden transition, a harsh reboot, a version change, an awakening in another reality. For those left behind, there is death. For those in the transition process, there is continuity. The only thing left from the past version is an inexplicable, strange feeling, an intense familiarity, sometimes a sense of emptiness. That is why death is perceived as traumatic, because consciousness makes a leap, but memory cannot carry everything. In conclusion, death is not an annihilation. It is a change at the code level. It is a timeline shift. It is a simulation update. And the only thing that remains constant in this system is consciousness. The body changes. The scenario changes. The world changes. But the essence of the experience remains the same. And the most striking part is this. The fact that you can read this right now means you've overcome many challenges. Chapter 7. The transmission of the Mandela effect is personal proof that this world is not a perfect and static structure, but a constantly updated, rewritten, and sometimes flawed system. These distortions leave their mark not only on the external world, but also directly on your consciousness. Because, whether you are aware of it or not, you have already passed through these distortions. Now, we delve deeper into these confirmations. Because déjà vu, the images and momentary feeling of familiarity that seep from past lives, are not a product of imagination, but the infiltration of data packets from inter-system interactions into consciousness. Consciousness is not a static structure locked into a single timeline. Rather, it is a dynamic field in contact with multiple layers of possibility simultaneously. When the simulation begins to unravel, information that is normally filtered out begins to surface. It is at those moments that a feeling of absolute recognition emerges, even though you know it has never happened before. This feeling is not a construct of memory, but a trace of a timeline left behind. The brain is inadequate to explain this because it is only a receiver, not a source. Neuroscience defines déjà vu as an error. Explanations such as a brief disruption of time perception or synchronization of memory centers are offered. However, these explanations cannot account for the intense sense of certainty, the unshakable feeling of reality, and the bodily familiarity that the déjà vu experience carries. Because déjà vu is not just a thought, it is a recollection that permeates the person's entire being. Quantum theory opens a much more radical door at this point. Déjà vu is the momentary contact of consciousness with another version of your life. It is a brief resonance of consciousness between parallel possibilities. According to this perspective, the brain is not just a biological machine. The brain is a receiver antenna operating at the quantum level, capable of being tuned to multiple timelines. Under normal circumstances, signals are separate, filtered, and do not interact with each other. However, During systemic transitions, traumas, leaps of consciousness, or simulation updates, these signals overlap. Déjà vu is the perceptible manifestation of this overlap. The trace of a moment lived elsewhere, in another version, seeps into the present. Past life memories are a clearer reflection of the same mechanism. Detailed memories, especially those seen in children and seemingly impossible to learn, demonstrate that consciousness is not reset. Studies at the University of Virginia have systematically documented thousands of cases. Children remember names, places, events, and even deaths from previous lives. These memories contain verifiable details, not symbolic ones. Plane crashes, battles, ship names, military units, names of real people, and dates of events have been individually verified. This shows that consciousness carries data from one simulation to another. A human being is not a single entity trapped in a single body, but software running in multi-layered simulations. Consciousness does not run on a single server. The same code runs in different versions in different environments. Usually, these versions are isolated from each other. However, sometimes data leaks occur at the boundaries of the system. Déjà vu, past life memories, and sudden feelings of familiarity are symptoms of these leaks. An inexplicable feeling of closeness with a newly met person also gains meaning in this context. This feeling is not a romantic illusion or a psychological projection. It is the remnant of a connection established in another timeline before. In quantum physics, this is called superposition, the overlapping of multiple states existing simultaneously for a brief moment. The experience develops in the direction in which consciousness adapts. However, other possibilities are not entirely eliminated. Here, the fundamental reality reemerges. Death is not an end. Death is a transition. If there have been small transitions through déjà vu before, if larger leaps were felt with past life memories, death is a more comprehensive version of this, a more dramatic reboot. One moment you are in this version, the next moment life continues in another version. No pain, no trauma, just a transition. Every déjà vu moment, every inexplicable feeling of familiarity, every past life memory is proof that this has been experienced countless times before. Consciousness awakens each time in the surviving timeline, because the experience is only possible in the continuing version. The remaining timelines close, but consciousness does not. This awareness radically changes the meaning of life. This life ends as your only version in the simulation. But you do not end. Your purpose here is not to survive, but to consciously transform, not to retreat in fear. Chapter 8. The central theme of this narrative rests on a radical truth that physics has finally had to accept. Nothing is solid. What we call matter is not, by its very nature, a fixed and tangible reality. It consists of measurable, decipherable, and rearrangeable packets of information. This is where the holographic universe theory comes in. According to this theory, the universe is not fundamentally a three-dimensional structure. It is a reflection from a deeper information field. In other words, the reality you experience is not a thing, but an image of a working code. In the holographic universe, death is not a gateway to darkness. Death is not the end of the system, but a transfer of data. The physical form dissolves, but the information is not lost. Nothing is erased. Consciousness does not shut down. Instead, awareness reconnects to another context, another timeline, another layer of simulation. You awaken, changed, but still existing. Modern physics is slowly catching up to this idea. The idea that the universe is not real, but composed of coded data fields, is not new. One of the first to grasp this truth was the physicist David Bohm. Bohm realized that the universe is not composed of separate, individually existing objects, but rather that everything is interconnected in an invisible, deeper order. According to him, the world we see is an open order. True reality is hidden in an invisible, hidden order. In other words, the universe is an image projected from a deep field of information, like a hologram. The characteristic of a hologram is that even if it is broken into pieces, each piece contains the complete image. Even a small piece carries the information of the entire structure. This means you are not just a body. You are a piece of consciousness carrying the information of the whole. Each individual is a different perspective of the entire system. Therefore, consciousness is not local. It is not limited to a single point. It is spread throughout the system. This idea was later mathematically deepened by physicists such as Leonard Susskind and Gerard 't Hooft. According to them, the universe is not a solid structure. It is a reflection of information encoded at its boundaries, creating a sense of reality within it. That is, everything you see, time, space, bodies, objects, is a stream of decoded data. Here's a critical truth. The brain doesn't produce consciousness. The brain is an interface that decodes consciousness. Just like a screen doesn't produce an image, it only displays it. The world you see, everything you touch, every moment you live, it's a version of code working deeper down and made readable by consciousness. Video games are a perfect metaphor for understanding this. The world inside the game isn't real. The mountains, cities, characters, they are all reflections of code working elsewhere. The player feels they are inside the game, but are actually outside of it. Now ask this question. When a character in the game dies, does the player die too? No. The player completely severs their connection with their avatar. In the holographic universe, your body is that avatar. Consciousness is the player themselves. What happens at the moment of death isn't a loss of consciousness, but a server change. One timeline closes, another instantly loads. The transition is seamless. That's why nothingness isn't experienced, because what is experienced never closes. Quantum physics supports this picture. Quantum entanglement shows that everything in the universe is fundamentally interconnected. Particles that once interacted instantly influence each other regardless of the distance between them. Einstein called this spooky action at a distance. But in a holographic universe, this isn't spooky. It's the normal functioning of the system. All information, all energy, and all consciousness are different expressions of the same field. This means your consciousness never completely disconnects from the system. When the body dissolves, awareness doesn't disappear. It remains intertwined with the field and reconnects to another context. Death is precisely that. Nothing more, nothing less. Reality is fractal. The same patterns repeat at different scales. The distribution of galaxies resembles neural networks. Rivers branch like blood vessels. Hurricanes and DNA strands follow the same mathematical curves. This repeating structure shows that death is also a fractal process. There are small transitions. There are large transitions. But they all operate on the same principle. Therefore, death is just one link in an endless cycle. You've lived it before. In every life, every change, every shift in the timeline. Your personal proof is that you've already touched it. Have you ever had a dream so vivid, so real? And when you woke up, did you ever question which world was real? Sometimes, reality seems too perfect to you. Chapter 9. If death is not truly an annihilation, but merely a transfer of data, then the fundamental question is, why should we live in fear? Why should we suppress ourselves, postpone our potential, and settle for a small, cautious, and limited life? Your goal here is not survival. Survival is the system's lowest objective. You are here to experience, transform, and awaken. Because when this version of the game is complete, the next version will already be loaded. And that is what happens. The real issue is not understanding death. The real issue is learning to use that knowledge. Now we come to the critical threshold. Can the simulation be consciously altered? Can unwanted timelines in reality be avoided? Can it be rewritten while within the system? The answer is clear. Yes. And this power is not in the hands of a distant future or a secret elite. It is present in you right now. Because the truth is, your consciousness shapes the code. Every thought is an input, every emotion a signal, every belief a parameter that the system reads. The simulation responds accordingly. If the same cycles repeat in your life, if the same fears, the same relationships, the same limitations persist, it's not because of fate. Because the default programming is still working. The system isn't broken. The code is old. It's time to break it. Reality is a responsive code. Your thoughts are not passive. Your emotions are not random. They are direct commands sent into the quantum field. The universe doesn't decide on its own. The system waits for instructions from you. In physics, this already has a name: the observer effect. What you focus on takes shape. What you pay attention to transforms into potential matter. So why position yourself as a victim? You are the programmer. The rules of the simulation determine how you write reality, not how you experience it. Think of the universe as a game engine. Your attention determines where your avatar goes. Your emotions determine which commands are entered. Your beliefs are the set of rules that define what is possible and what is not. Do you want a new outcome? Dreaming isn't enough. You need to change the code. That's why quantum visualization isn't passive dreaming, it's direct intervention. Step 1. Clearly define the timeline you want. Vague requests are not read by the system. Be specific. Step 2. Don't wish. Don't hope. Feel as if you are living it. Because the system responds to emotional reality, not wishes. Step 3. Repeat this for 10 to 20 minutes every day. Place it in the emotional center, not the mind. The more consistent the emotion, the clearer the signal. The simulation reflects what you make it feel. If you send fear, fear grows. If you send abundance, doors open. A more advanced application, quantum journaling. At night, write down your life as if it has already happened. Add details. Use sensitivity. Put the emotion into words. Read it again in the mornings. This way, the subconscious begins to accept the new code as the default. Here's the key. When your conscious intention aligns with your subconscious belief, the system gains resistance. Disconnection is the power source, the truth nobody tells you. Reacting emotionally to your current reality fixes it. Anger, rebellion, despair, all feed the old code. Disconnection isn't indifference. It's mastery. When you choose not to energize what you don't want, the system can't find the fuel to feed that line. The code starves. The update begins. There are people who already do this. The placebo effect shows that belief changes biology. Athletes experience victory so vividly that their bodies adapt beforehand. Lucky people, not by chance, achieve emotional attunement. Do you know what happens when you apply this to death? It becomes limitless. You no longer fear death because you know it's a transition. You wake up braver every day because you realize you cannot be destroyed. Death ceases to be a threat. It becomes a checkpoint. And this awareness transforms every aspect of your life. Now, we're at a critical point. It's time to do this consciously. Reality isn't against you. Reality is thanks to you. Next step, rewrite the source code of your subconscious. Because right now, code you didn't write is running. Old beliefs, borrowed fears, programs loaded before you woke up. Now the question arises, what if you could edit these? Chapter 10. The Subconscious Operating System. Taking control of the real architecture. At this point, we are no longer proceeding with information on the surface. Now, we are delving into the deeper layers of the system. Because what changes reality is not your conscious intentions. It is the code your subconscious is running. Most people are unaware of this. Every situation that repeats itself in their lives is actually the result of an active software program. The same reactions, the same fears, the same results. These repetitions are not fate. They are commands silently running in the subconscious. The subconscious doesn't listen to your desires. It executes what you have made habitual. It executes the patterns you emotionally repeat, not your thoughts. That's why you may have understood that death is a transition, but your life hasn't fully changed yet. Because awareness alone is not enough. You are not yet in complete control. Even science confirms this. Approximately 95% of behaviors, decisions, and reactions are governed by the subconscious. This means that a large part of what you call me throughout the day is an automatic program. And this program continues to produce reality without you being aware of it. This is where simulation comes in. Because simulation responds not to conscious desires, but to subconscious signals. Reality reads not what you say, but what you live by believing. The subconscious is the interface between you and the quantum field. Like a translator, it takes your emotions, beliefs, and recurring internal states and transforms them into physical reality. That's why positive thinking isn't enough. That's why simply wanting isn't enough. Because the subconscious doesn't think. It doesn't argue. It doesn't analyze. It simply acts. The mastery here is learning to speak the language of the subconscious. This language is not logic. This language isn't just made up of words. This language is a combination of emotion plus repetition plus natural acceptance. Neville Goddard understood this perfectly. He didn't teach dreaming. He taught settling into the feeling of the outcome. When he said, "Live from the end," what he meant was, don't wait for the reality you want in the future. Now, internally, make it natural. There is no time for the subconscious. Only now exists. And again. That's why the moment you wake up in the morning is so important. Because the subconscious is most receptive the moment you wake up. How you start your day sets the code for the rest of the day. Starting the day with gratitude isn't a motivational technique. It's a code change. The signal, I am safe. The command, I lack nothing. The internal affirmations repeated throughout the day are actually instructions given to the subconscious. I am abundant. I am calm. I am in control. As these things are repeated, the old code becomes starved, because the system cannot run two conflicting programs simultaneously. Then comes the key moment at night, a few minutes before falling asleep, when the doors of the subconscious are completely open. The visualization that occurs at these moments is not just a dream, it is a direct upload. When you end the day as if you lived it in the reality you want, the subconscious doesn't distinguish it. It accepts it as data, and the simulation adjusts accordingly. When old fears resurface, the thing to do is not to fight them, not to suppress them, and certainly not to argue with them. The only thing to do is to remain neutral. Avoid giving them energy, because if there is no emotion, the code doesn't work. This is not an escape. This is mastery. Most people feed their current reality by giving emotional responses, by getting angry, by being afraid, by falling into despair. But calmness starves the old program, and every program that becomes powerless eventually shuts down. A simulation isn't hacked by force. It's rewritten with focus. Your emotions are signals. Fear produces a low-resolution reality. Gratitude and strength produce high-resolution results. That's why the idea of "I'll feel good when everything is all right" works in reverse. First you feel good, then the system adapts. Now you should clearly see this. Reality isn't against you. Reality is carrying out the commands it receives from you. Death is no longer a threat. This is a level transition. This awareness breaks the chains of fear in life. You are no longer an NPC. You are not living with default settings. You are not reacting. You are directing. And now we approach the next illusion: time. Because linear time is the system's greatest lock. And when you unlock it, transitions between timelines become possible. But that's the subject of the next awakening. Chapter 11: Transcending Time and Unlocking the Simulation. Birth, struggle, progress, death. For most people, life is perceived as such a cycle, but the simulation is not limited to this. Time is not a rigid law, but merely a setting. Physics has already proven this. Quantum physics not only questions time, it collapses it at the quantum level. Past, present, and future exist together. They are not independent of each other. As Einstein showed, time is not absolute, but subjective, flexible, and dependent on perception. So why do most people still live as if stuck in a linear story? Because our brain needs a narrative to make sense of experiences. It wants a line, a beginning, and an end. But consciousness belongs to a much deeper truth. Everything happens now. Your future is not in front of you, but beside you. Even if you are unaware, an infinite number of versions of yourself already exist. Healed, successful, fearless, free, and fulfilled. All of these already exist. There is no need to strive to reach them, to compete to win them. All you need to do is become aware of these realities and initiate the transition to them. Quantum leaps are not a metaphor. They are a planned reality. Particles don't move linearly from point A to point B. There are no intermediate points. They leap instantly. Your consciousness can do this too. You've done it before, and you can do it again now. Sudden insights, striking results, miraculous encounters, groundbreaking developments. These occur in a reality where time is not linear. Death is not a process requiring effort or waiting. It is a leap, a transition. How do we apply this in daily life? By clearly defining the new reality. No fog, no uncertainty. Just determine exactly what you want and emotionally transition to it. Experience the emotion as if it were real. Stop thinking about how and when time will collapse. The simulation doesn't need a step-by-step plan. It only needs your signal. Belief and emotion are equivalent to quantum coordinates. This is how the system knows where to drop you. Every leap on the timeline happens every day. You've seen people recover from deadly illnesses overnight. A single conversation completely changed someone's life. Random encounters create instant success or love. All of this shows that linear time is an illusion. Every coincidence is actually a conscious leap. Death is like that too. Not a slow disappearance, but a click, a transition. You are on one timeline, then you jump to another. Every déjà vu, every Mandela effect is silent evidence of this transition. At this point, fear disappears. Death is no longer a threat, just another data transfer. The way to overcome fear is to see it as simulation code and refuse to react. Fear is a remnant of old survival programs. It makes you obsessed with safety, bound to routine, and risk-averse. But now you know this. Death is just a leap in the timeline, a handover. Overcoming fear is equivalent to permanently erasing it from the system. There are 3 basic steps to implementing this. Observe fear. Don't give it energy. Fear requires reaction and energy. Give it nothing. Stay calm. Be neutral. Starve the program and replace it with direct action. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the ability to act against it. Every conscious step taken against fear breaks the cycle and reshapes your brain to fearlessness. Reprogram your subconscious. The old operating system was built on fear, survival, and limitations. It's time to erase it. The new code is, my consciousness instantly shapes my reality. I am the observer, the encoder, and the creator. Every thought is a command, every emotion a signal, every belief an instruction. Repeat these instructions until they become automatic. Keep your frequency high. Low frequencies close doors. High frequencies open pathways, enabling synchronization and flow. Gratitude, openness, trust, calmness, and strength are high frequencies in harmony with the system. When you maintain this state, the simulation responds to you, and reality adapts. The 4th step is to eliminate the old timeline. You cannot write a new code while defending the old reality. Repeating the old narrative over and over again means keeping it alive. Now, present the reality you want and let go of everything else. The 5th step is to put impartial observation into practice. Not reacting to chaos means reclaiming your power. The Stoics, mystics, and monks knew this. They acted with an impartial, coded consciousness, not a reactive one. The 6th step is to live from the end. Stop waiting. Feel now. Act as if it has already happened. Reality is concerned with who you are now, not who you were before. So walk like an architect. Think like a creator. Feel that the change has already happened. Doors open, obstacles disappear, opportunities come to you, because you are now in alignment with your role as an architect. Death happens as background noise, another timeline, a leap. No drama, no fear. You are in control. You are no longer a character. You are an architect. You shattered the lies the simulation offered you. Time was a tool, death a gateway, and fear merely a code. And now, take a deep breath. What you've learned so far is no longer an idea. it's reality. The key given to you is the key to unlocking the simulation from within. No more reacting. Now it's about creating. You are the coder, the creator, and the architect. Every thought, every feeling, every belief leaves a mark on the system. Now, your reality is being shaped by your command.